Hello, everyone. Welcome to the most debatable podcast episode that we probably have ever done. Yes, Dina, today is the day where we are going to question, are carbohydrates really king? What? All of our listeners did he? He did not just say that. Yes, we are going to look at carbohydrates and question what a lot of people are just throwing out these days and just carbohydrate, carbohydrate, carbohydrate. What should carbohydrate? What should I do? Carbohydrate. What is your recommendation? Carbohydrate, right? Don't you feel like carbohydrates are just like we know they're everywhere, but that's like a lot of messaging these days that we're hearing from a lot of, let's just say, different people, right? Let's just qualify that as just different people, right? What do you think, Dee? Have you been
I
hearing the same
mean,
messaging?
yes, Bob, I have been known, even in my own presentations and webinars, to say carbohydrates are queen.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
so whatever that might be, just a nuance, king or queen. I
King
have
or
said
queen?
this.
Yep.
However, there are things to pack into this conversation and, thoughtful debate.
Yes, so we're going to tell you we're going to focus in on four particular areas of answering the question, are carbohydrates really king or queen, right? But basically, we're getting at, are carbohydrates really as important as everyone seems to be making them out to be? And I don't mean everyone. Like you look at anyone who's doing carnivore, and obviously they don't care about carbohydrates. But it just seems like as sport dietitians, we're hearing the chatter quite a bit among a lot of different people, and we just we want to bring up some talking points and some discussion points so we can put it into context because that's what we want to provide you listeners is let's put this into context because whenever you ask us a question, we need to put it in context also, right? So
Yeah.
let's put this into context. We're going to end with four discussion points to help you really answer the question, are carbohydrates really king? Point number one, we are looking at carbohydrates in response to hormonal control. And by hormonal control, what I really mean is blood sugar control because we're trying to control the hormones glucagon and insulin, which are secreted from the pancreas, right? You've heard this before. If you've been on our episodes, our podcast, you've heard Dina and I talk about the metabolic efficiency training concept where we want to put carbohydrate, protein, and fat together in appropriate quantities and ratios to influence glucagon, but more specifically insulin, right? We don't want sugar spikes. We don't want insulin spikes because that does not usually work out to the best in terms of health and performance most of the time. And with the messaging that is going off these days and just saying, you know what, just eat more carbs without context, without even mentioning protein or carbohydrates, all that's going to do is spike your blood sugar, spike your insulin level. You're going to practically turn off your ability to burn fat, all those fat stores you have in your body. You're going to turn that off. Potential other issues, sleep issues, maybe some blood work issues, some blood lipid issues. Like there's a host of disadvantages of not controlling your blood sugar. And I kind of feel, Dina, like with a lot of people out there just saying, well, just eat more carbs without putting in context, I think they're going to destroy people's hormone balance.
There are some listeners who are experiencing a rise in glucose hearing you talk
That's right. That's
without
right.
carbs coming into the scene.
Yes.
But this is the point of the conversation, is to highlight some of the other things. Also, just putting into the context, like carbs are king for what,
Yes. Oh my gosh.
right?
We actually should have started with that. Yeah.
Well, if you want to expand on that thought,
Well,
here's a
yeah, I
bit
mean,
to.
why? Like, if we, like as sport dietitians, we look at health and performance, right? And sometimes separately, but most of the time interrelated because one supports the other, or health really supports performance. But yeah, I mean, if we have a dysregulation of our blood sugar from a health perspective, we have all these, I call it a blood sugar roller coaster. From a health perspective, that could actually lead to a lot of metabolic disorders, right? And if you have metabolic disorders, that is going to impair your performance, right? So if you put this into context, like, oh, what purpose is this, right? Like in the daily nutrition, like your meals and snacks, no, you should not, like carbohydrates are not king. I'm just gonna go out and say it, right? Because I kind of feel like we have to have like almost like the Jack Queen King, right? If we're looking at cards, because carbohydrates need protein and they need fat. We need all of them to help regulate blood sugar, insulin control from a daily nutrition perspective to control hormone fluctuations and hormone balance. So in my mind, I wouldn't say carbohydrates are king from a daily nutrition perspective, because we need the queen in the jack if we are labeling those. I'm sorry for labeling, but I'm just bringing in fat and protein here, and it could be not king related, queen related, or jack related, but you absolutely need all three nutrients. I would say 90 to 95% of the time you eat throughout the day, right? I mean, I that's what I teach athletes to do all the time. I'm like, try not to have a carbohydrate by itself, even if it's a very high nutrient dense carbohydrate, because we need protein, we need fat. So that's my messaging when it comes to daily nutrition. Now, nutrient timing, training nutrition could be a little different, D. And I think there's a lot of different situations there where carbohydrates really do fit in as maybe the king there for some situations.
Yes, absolutely. And this is reminding me, or kind of segueing to a second point here, Bob, is that notion or that statement, carbs are king or queen, whatever, the be all end all, is also what are we looking at? So diving another step deeper, I think of, and this should be heard by all, like just pause here for a second, but like the quality or what kind of carb. I mean, there is this like resilience aspect. It's kind of an anecdotal way to look at nutrition and our tolerance or our use of carbohydrates as we go through aging process, right, Bob? Is like, well, anything goes to get your carbs.
Right.
Yeah, that might work depending on the kind of athlete, your age, your health status, and everything. But then there is that lens of like quality, like what is in that carb. And we were joking offline, like the Pop Tart versus the sweet potato example. We can have control for the same amount of carbohydrate if we're looking at daily nutrition plans. But without question, when we're putting it in this broader context or even a more health focused aspect, is we're going to get way more out of the sweet potato kind of carb than our Pop-Tart carb for all of those bioactives, the things that we talk about all the time, like vitamins, minerals, fiber, all those other compounds in foods. So this is where I think that messaging, carbs are king, gets cloudy. Because certainly as we age, for many of us, I would argue the majority of us, neglecting this angle contributes to a whole host of issues.
Well, and I think that what you're getting at is putting in what types of carbs may really be king, right? That's kind of what you're getting at with the
Yeah, thank you.
nutrient density and looking at that. And there's something I heard that's very profound. It sticks with me. If you're in your 20s, you're eating for actually in your 40s, right? And if you're in your 30s, you're eating for your 50s. And if you're 40s, you're eating for your 60s. So,
Yeah.
what we eat at a young age is actually reflecting your health outcomes decades in the future, right? So I think we need and listen. I think we need to look at that a little more closely. But listen, I've eaten my fair share of Pop-Tarts growing up, and
Same.
that was it. And it's interesting because that's when I first got introduced to triathlon and endurance racing and training. Because at that point, the messaging was super high carb, low fat, right? Protein wasn't even discussed, right? We had the food guide pyramid, that whole thing. But at that point, the messaging in sport nutrition was just fuel. Like eat whatever carbohydrates you can get your hands on in fuel, which kind of explains why I had so many gut issues back then. But that it's a good point, D, because I think a lot of the messaging these days is like, oh yeah, well just have your Pop Tart, have your red vines, have your gummy bears, like have that stuff. And okay, yes, it's providing carbohydrates, but to your point, I don't know if those are the best carbohydrates. We certainly know not all the time, maybe a time and place, like you're not going to take a sweet potato on a soccer field with you, right? Although you
Right.
shouldn't bring a Pop-Tart on the soccer field either, but you know what I'm saying?
I mean, again, I think this is just where broader piece here, Bob, is like these kind of black and white messages are just
Yes. Oh,
laden with so many disclaimers
so
or
much. Yeah.
whatever. And I know this is super hard for some people who are not in our field of profession, is like
Hmm.
discerning all of this when you see the stuff on
Yeah.
social media, for example.
Well, it's a good point. And I just was thinking the same thing. Like if maybe someone says, oh, just eat more carbs, just put more carbs in your body. The first place their mind is going to go is their pleasure center, right? So what carbohydrates give me the most pleasure from a dopamine hit or whatever brain chemical hit? And they may choose the Pop-Tart. They may choose a donut. They may choose a cookie because that is maybe either how they grew up, what they're exposed to. Maybe that's what they think of. They're certainly not going to think like, oh, I'm going to have some strawberries, or I'm going to have a sweet potato. Like it's not on most people's minds to have that because it's interesting because that's the psychology. We associate our as human beings, I'm going to just go out generally and say this, we associate like sweet potatoes, vegetables, fruits with meals, right? Because that's how we think they should be put into play. But if you're just like, oh, hey, I'm just going to grab a carbohydrate snack, what is that carbohydrate snack going to be, D? It's going to be chips. It's going to be cookies. It's going to be crackers. Like, you know what I mean? Because that's just psychologically how we're built as humans. This kind of feeds into the third point, which is very close to your point of the nutrient density, is the type of carbohydrate in influence to your gut health. So as we've talked about on previous episodes too, but gut health, digestive health is so important. And if you're just feeding a lot of simple sugars or added sugars in any carbohydrate that is not nutrient dense, that does not provide a good amount of fiber, vitamins, minerals, you're actually contributing to a dysbiotic state in your gut. So dysbiosis is just an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. So again, to the Pop-Tart example versus sweet potato, the Pop-Tart with a whole bunch of added sugar is contributing to bad bacteria in your gut, an increase in bad bacteria, right? Whereas the sweet potato with all of its prebiotic fiber will help the probiotics in your gut, in your digestive system to do the thing they need to do. So it'll actually increase the good bacteria and which will also produce postbiotics, which are short chain fatty acids. So there's actually a health impact and consequence in choosing the right type or the wrong type of carbohydrates. So again, looking at that from a gut health perspective, and especially sorry, I'm going off on a soapbox on this one, especially because the gut-brain axis and all of these disorders, these cognitive disorders we're seeing these days, you name it, anything cognitive or mental, there is a significant link to gut health and these cognitive disorders. And that is really what I want to emphasize, especially with the athletes I work with, especially my younger athletes, my college athletes. I am trying to make that bridge between carbohydrate sources, gut health, and cognitive functioning in classrooms, right? Not necessarily for their sport, although that's important too, but just cognitive functioning in general. For our non-college athletes listening to our podcast, you can relate, right? You need to have better and higher cognitive functioning at work, right? That's just a thing. That's what we do in our lives. We work, right? So I feel like the type of carbohydrates really influences gut health one way or the other.
I mean, I will just add on to that, Bob, like the gut brain axis is also then the gut muscle axis. It's axis that's being kind of defined, elucidated a little bit more. So this pertains to athletes as well, right?
Yeah.
Is just that role. And so when we say carbs are king, for sure, I'm not neglecting or discounting those who just simply need more fuel on board, right? Or they need to pay attention to how they're fueling their workouts. Or maybe they're prone or dealing with or disordered eating and the like. That's a whole part of the assessment process. But this other angle here from gut health is the other systems that are being talked to and talked back from.
Absolutely. And let me just add one more thing to that point
Okay,
really quick, just because you mentioned something that triggered some.
Yeah.
When I work with some college athletes who need to gain weight, carbohydrates actually are a very important part of a weight gain strategy, right? So I'm not discounting carbohydrates either, but the right types of carbs. It's not like I'm going to say, hey, eat 3 boxes of Pop-Tarts today and you're going to gain some weight, right? Because that's going to destroy some pathways and systems in your body. So I just want to add that in that situation too, carbohydrates are extremely important for weight gain.
Well, the last little bucket here, and I will use that word bucket, Bob, because I'm going to jam a whole bunch of things in the bucket.
Jam it.
For this talking point of, 2 carbs are king statement is, okay, for sure, nutrition and carbohydrate quantity, type, timing, what's going on with gut health matter when we're looking at the health of an individual, you, the listener, and your athletic performance, whatever that is for you, however you define it. But we also, I should say, and we also need to consider the other inputs and outputs, meaning your sleep quality, your sleep duration, your level of acute and chronic stressors, mental health. I mean, the list is long, Bob, of all these other things we could put in this bucket to really determine, is it just carbs we need to look at? Or, which I'd argue, no, there's so much more to us as individuals. And so I think as much as we may, see that message in various channels, not for us to all forget that we are so much more than the carbs we eat. So that part, I think, can't be stated enough. I wish I had some more poetic way to say it without sounding like I get PO'd about it, but monitoring and assessing as our work or from our work as sports dietitians, can't neglect all those other pieces.
No, it's a good point, and I feel like, I mean, obviously nutrition is a bucket or a pillar, however we want to say it, and carbohydrates are in that or made or consist of that. But I think it's important what you said is because when you were saying sleep and stress and everything, what I was doing was I was actually thinking of hormones, and I was thinking of carbohydrates and the functions of carbohydrates with certain hormones, and I was even thinking about sleep, D, like. When we think of recovery, sometimes we do associate carbohydrates with recovery and faster recovery because we're filling up our muscle glycogen tanks. But when sleep is improper, let's call it, we actually have a slower recovery, right? Even if carbohydrates are on board and enough of them on board. So, and even in a stress state, right? When stress is high, cortisol is high. Cortisol can be affected by carbohydrates also. But if you're not controlling stress, you're not controlling cortisol. And I mean, the carbohydrates are they're just there. Like they're just, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's kind of like a supporting cast, but so carbohydrates are very important in everything. But like you're saying on that fourth point, that fourth bucket is we need to look at on a holistic basis also and look at sleep and look at stress management techniques and even look at social interactions, right? Because all of those things are so necessary when it comes to energy level, recovery, right? And just honestly, just living life, to be honest with you. The whole point of this, listeners, was to bring up the topic of carbohydrates and to show you different context buckets, if you will, right? So just, if you ever hear someone saying, kind of like we titled this, are carbohydrates really king, or eat more carbs, carbohydrates are king, that's all you need is carbs. I think take a step back and put it in a context first. And that's why we wanted to give you those 4 buckets to help you put it into context, because sometimes, yes, I am not going to disregard carbohydrates. They are extremely important in certain cases, but there are nuances associated with this, which you just heard us talk about. Dina, anything to finish up?
I don't think so, other than if you, the listener, are feeling a little confused about these messages, what we're saying, right? Or whatever else you're saying related to carbs are king on your internet feeds, your social media feeds, that really just taking the time to work with a health professional, sport dietitian or the like, really helps then uncover your needs, your nuances, things that might have been missed unintentionally, or perhaps just an oversight from the evolution of the science, or things that have just happened over time and what we've learned. So I think that's just a call in for people to take some time and really address that one-on-one. Yeah.
And you can also go over to our Patreon account and address it in our community, right? So if you, if you want to, maybe just vent a little bit or ask some questions about carbohydrates and kind of the 4 buckets that we presented, or just have some discussions with us, that's where Dina and I are. You can go over to patreon.com/ISN podcast and, join our free membership and join in on the conversations. I think that's a next best place to go to and to progress, especially if you have questions. Of course you can all email us also, but I just feel like, pointing towards our Patreon account, D, would really be helpful, especially with this topic, because as you mentioned, social media takes over a lot, right? It really does. And it has so many confusing messages. It actually has some benefits too, but I feel like When it comes to carbohydrates, what I'm seeing, just as you mentioned earlier, is the messaging is more confusing than helpful right now. So we would love to have some interactions with you all in our Patreon community.
That would be great. Yeah, Patreon. The app is super slick, Bob, on those old smartphones.
Yeah.
So that's a handy way to join the community. So, well, with that, Bob, we will wrap up this episode and we look forward to you all joining us on our next one.